We'll start this lesson off by talking about what free Hyper-V 2012 has to offer you. Anytime someone offers something for free, of course, you're going to have some questions about whether or not it's a very useful product. I assure you, free Hyper-V Server 2012 is actually a very powerful free product from Microsoft, and I applaud them for offering such a full-featured product available at no cost. Free Hyper-V Server 2012 actually provides all the same advanced features of Windows Server 2012 with the Hyper-V role enabled. There's no virtualization rights for any virtual machines that you run underneath it. Of course, you would have to purchase any Windows licenses for Windows virtual machines that you would want to run. But for example, you could run the Linux operating system that is supported now at no cost. So you could run free Hyper-V Server 2012 and a version of free Linux underneath at no cost and have a very powerful Type 1 hypervisor with many advanced features. There's no local graphical interface. That's really the only drawback with free Hyper-V 2012. So it's very similar to Windows Server Core. In other words, you just get a command prompt on the local server. You can use the sconfig tool on the local console to configure, let's say, an IP address and some other basic information like the server name. But other than that, if you want to actually administer the virtual machines, most likely you're going to do it with Hyper-V Manager running remotely on another workstation. However, you could, of course, use PowerShell locally on the Hyper-V Server 2012 console as well. To download free Hyper-V Server 2012, I went to my favorite search engine and typed in that phrase, free Hyper-V Server 2012. It brought me to the Hyper-V Server landing page where I clicked to download free Hyper-V Server 2012. From there, I had to enter my Microsoft Live username and password. If you don't have a Microsoft Live account, you can register for one on that page for free. Next, I downloaded the ISO file for free Hyper-V Server 2012, which is about 1.6 gigabytes. Let's go over to my Hyper-V lab and I'll show you how I installed free Hyper-V Server 2012. Here I am on my Windows 8 desktop, and this is actually the website that I used to download the free Microsoft Hyper-V 2012. I clicked on the free download right here. From there, you just log in, and then immediately it starts downloading the ISO file. So if we close this out or minimize that and go down to my files, actually what I downloaded was this, the 1.7 gigabyte Hyper-V Server 2012 ISO image. So unfortunately today you cannot use client Hyper-V in Windows 8, nor can you use another Hyper-V server to actually run free Hyper-V. You can only run free Hyper-V on a physical server, or you could run free Hyper-V in 3 different VMware options. VMware is a virtualization software company, and they do allow you to run free Hyper-V inside their virtual machines for testing and lab purposes to learn about free Hyper-V. So you could run free Hyper-V inside VMware Workstation on Windows. You could run it inside VMware Fusion in the Mac OS X operating system or inside a VMware vSphere server. So in my case, this is the Windows operating system. I'm going to run free Hyper-V inside VMware Workstation. You can get a 30-day eval of VMware Workstation, and so that's not going to cost you anything for 30 days. You can evaluate free Hyper-V and see if you want to install it on a physical server. Or, of course, if you have a physical server already available, you can just download free Hyper-V and install it directly on the physical server. So if I open up VMware Workstation here, this is VMware Workstation 9. It's very easy to create a new virtual machine. I'll go through the typical configuration here. I'll select the ISO image that I downloaded, click Next. I'll say that this is going to be a free Hyper-V 2012 VM. We'll just give it that name for now. I'll say Next here. Take the default disk size, 60 gigabytes, and we could take even the default memory for demonstration purposes. Now, with 1 gig of RAM on a free Hyper-V virtual machine, you're not going to be able to run any virtual machines inside. But actually, if you go in and you customize this, and let's say that I made this 3 gigabytes, roughly 3 gigabytes, and I added, let's say, a second CPU, a second processor, say close here, we'll create that new virtual machine, and then we should actually be able to run a virtual machine inside, a nested virtual machine. From here, we're going to go through what looks like the standard Windows 2012 server installation process, but notice it says Microsoft Hyper-V Server 2012. So I'm just going to take the default here. By clicking Next, I'll click Install Now. I'll accept the license agreement. I'll do a custom installation. That would be a brand new installation of Hyper-V Server. I'll take the default on the disk space. And there we go. We are installing Microsoft Hyper-V Server. Now, this will take a few minutes. So just like one of those cooking shows where they already have a completed dish that they pull out of the oven as soon as they show you how to make it, I'm going to go up here to my Hyper-V Server tab where I have just installed Hyper-V Server. So I haven't even logged in yet. This is what the installation looks like when it's completed. So I'll go over here, I'll click Control-Alt-Delete. I'll log in as administrator. I'll need to change the administrator's password because so far he doesn't have a password. And I just went full screen, and this is what Hyper-V Server 2012 looks like. You get a couple command prompts. If you try to go down here to the bottom left of the Start menu, no, there is no Start menu. There's no taskbar. You just get a command line. Now, you do get this sconfig utility that comes up by default. This is the server configuration utility. It's a text-based, menu-driven interface that allows you to configure things like domain or workgroup membership, computer name, administrator account, remote management. You can enable remote desktop and connect to the server remotely, but no, you're not going to get a graphical interface. You're just going to get what you see here on the free Hyper-V Server 2012 console. You can set your network settings in here, date and time, log off, restart the server, shut down, and of course perform other commands up here, even Hyper-V administration commands. But it's not going to be very fun to administer this server completely from the command line. So what I recommend you do usually is to go into the network settings, get the IP address information about this server. Notice that it's 10.0.1.119. And then you can go over to a desktop system where you've installed the Windows Remote Server Administration tools. Those are completely free, and they're going to include Hyper-V Manager. From there, you could connect to this server and administer it remotely just as you would any other paid commercial edition of Hyper-V. You could also, of course, go to any server in your infrastructure that already has Hyper-V, and you could use the Hyper-V Manager on that server to administer this server. So now that we know that the IP address there is 10.0.1.119, of course, if this was a production server, we'd set that to be a static IP address, but I happen to know that that's an automatic DHCP address assigned to this server, which is fine for testing and lab and demonstration purposes. So now let me go over to another server, actually, where I already have Hyper-V Manager installed, and let's connect to this server using that IP address so you can see how I can actually administer a free Hyper-V Server 2012 system using the traditional Hyper-V Manager graphical interface. All right, here I am on a Windows Server 2012 Hyper-V host that already has Hyper-V Manager installed. Of course, like I said, you don't need a Windows Server 2012 Hyper-V server just to administer a free Hyper-V Server 2012 system, because you can just download the free Microsoft Remote Server Administration tools that include Hyper-V Manager and install those on your desktop. This system just already happens to have it, so I'm going to use it. I'm just going to connect to that IP address that we saw. And there's the free Hyper-V server. We never changed the name, so it just has the default name. No virtual machines are found on it yet. I can go in here to the Hyper-V server settings. And notice how, yes, even free Hyper-V server can do things like live migration, storage migration, and replication. I'll go ahead and click cancel here. And let's go ahead and create a new virtual machine. I'll just click next here. We'll just take the default name. I'm going to have to give it less RAM. I'm going to have to give it less RAM than normal because this is running on a free Hyper-V host that's actually running as a virtual machine. I'll just take some of the defaults here. I'm not going to create even a virtual disk for it. I just want to create the most basic shell of a virtual machine that I can. All right, we created a virtual machine in free Hyper-V Server 2012. Let's go ahead and start it up. Okay, so our new virtual machine is running. If I double click on it, that brings up the console of the virtual machine. No, we haven't yet installed an operating system inside of it, but you get the point here. We took a virtualization product, in this case VMware Workstation, we installed free Hyper-V Server 2012 inside as a virtual machine. Then inside of that, inside of free Hyper-V Server 2012, we installed another virtual machine, or we created another virtual machine. We were able to power it on, so now we've got virtual machines here running 2 layers deep. It's a good way to test free Hyper-V Server 2012. You can use the free evaluation of VMware Workstation to do it, or if you have a physical server available, you can install free Hyper-V Server 2012 on top. Free Hyper-V Server 2012 is a powerful Type 1 virtualization platform. It offers good performance, and even the advanced features like live migration, storage migration, and Hyper-V Replica. All of those new features available in Windows Server 2012 Hyper-V are also available in free Hyper-V Server 2012, with the exception of having a graphical console. But you saw how easy it was to connect from any other system that has Hyper-V Manager installed to the free Hyper-V Server 2012, create virtual machines, configure the Hyper-V server, etc. So that's free Hyper-V Server 2012. You saw how to download it, how to install it, what the console looks like, how to connect to it from Hyper-V Manager, how to create and power on a virtual machine. So with that, let's go back to our slides. All right, to wrap up this lesson, we just completed downloading Hyper-V Server 2012, the free edition. We booted that server actually from an ISO. We did it inside a virtual machine to test it, but of course you could also do it on a physical server. From there, we used another Windows server that already had Hyper-V Manager to manage the new free Hyper-V server, but we could have also installed the Microsoft Remote Server Administration tools on my local workstation. Thanks for watching this lesson on downloading and installing Hyper-V Server 2012.